Welcome to 2025 at Tech Yes City, and NVidia have started off the year with a massive announcement with their RTX 5000 series graphics cards. My phone over the last few days has been blowing up. People have wanted me to talk about my thoughts and opinions on this announcement, things that I'm looking forward to, things that I think need more clarification on, definitely when we're looking at things like the MFG, the 4X frame gen and stuff like that, and the comparisons too, compared to just typical gamers gaming with a lot of this stuff off. What are my thoughts there? So we're going to talk about the specs first up. If you're into just looking at the raw specs of the graphics cards, here is where they've announced the RTX 5090 first, and this is going to be, I think, the first time in maybe 16 or 17 years where NVIDIA's done a 512-bit bus graphics card, and they're including now 32 gigabytes of VRAM on this monster 5090. Now, this is also carrying GDDR7 memory at speeds of roughly 28 gigabits per second. So you are going to see, not just with the CUDA core count going to over 21,000 versus, I believe, around 16,000 on the 4090, you're going to see a massive increase in CUDA cores, and also you're going to have a lot more memory throughput there. So this is going to mean for especially the highest of highest end gamers, not just more frame rates, but possibly even a smoother experience, not because of just the frame rates itself, but because you've just got so much more memory throughput there. So a lot of enthusiasts on the high end who just don't care about money are going to absolutely love the 5090. Though referring back to that, who don't care about money, that's where we're going back to the price point here. It's going up from $1,599 on the 4090 now to a whopping $1,999. So it's going to be around a 2,000 USD graphics card, which is going to be a huge amount. I think a lot of people are talking to me when they're messaging me going, Brian, this thing is going to cost, at least in Australia, 4,000 Australian dollars. And in ways, that's not NVIDIA's fault with the 4,000 Australian dollars, as well as if we look at places like Japan and other places where the currency is just so weak versus the US dollar, that's not really NVIDIA's fault there. They can't control what is the magical purchasing price parity of the US dollar. Though up until this point, there's a lot of hype here, and we're gonna put the brakes on the hype train a little bit and just talk about the benchmarks here, because all we've got is a graph from NVIDIA that shows 1x and 2x, and then a new technology they're introducing calling MFG, or DLSS4, which is multi-frame generation. So for one frame, they're going to be putting out multiple frames as opposed to just inserting a frame in between two frames like they were previously doing with the previous generation of frame generation. That's a lot of generations there, but we'll also keep talking about generational improvements very soon. But basically, in a nutshell, wait for the third-party benchmarks, because we don't know really what to expect here. Because if you're into gaming with, say, frame generation off, or if the game you want to play doesn't support frame generation, then perhaps you're not going to get such a massive increase, and you might just want to stick on a 4090. Who knows? We're only going to know when we get the actual numbers in here. We can check out raw rasterization, performance increases for you guys. We can also check out ray tracing just on, and then also check out the new frame generation on versus off versus the 4090. So if you are nervous about spending 2,000 US dollars on a graphics card, but you want the absolute best, then you may wish to just wait, because depending on the title in the game, you may still even be, dare I say, CPU bottlenecked in some situations, depending on your gaming experience. The last thing to talk about with the 5090 is the power consumption here, going with a total graphics power of 575 watts. And now, I do believe this card is going to chew a lot of power, but I think it's going to be a little bit more refined than this initial figure states, because I think with the RTX 4000 series, I do know from speaking to a lot of people, there were a lot of people going out and buying, say, 750 watt power supplies thinking they would cut it with a 4090, and they were having problems with the whole system cutting out and things like that. So I think NVIDIA just stating massive power supply figures, both in the recommended power supply requirements as well as the total graphics board power, is a good thing, just to say, hey, if you're getting one of these graphics cards, make sure you're getting a really good power supply, you've got a really good case with good airflow, because I think NVIDIA don't want people trying to do a cookie cutter special when it comes to the flagship 5090. Even though me personally, I do love a good cookie cutter style gaming PC at Tech Yes City, But that said, what happened with the jacket this year that Jensen was wearing at the conference? Seems like it's gone the opposite way to cookie cutter. It's all flashy and bling now. But I think if you're gonna wear a bling jacket, the best place to do it would be Las Vegas. Anyhow, the final thing with the 5090 is the cooler size. 304 millimeters and a 2-slot design. Now it's gonna have a radically different change here in that it's gonna be a flow-through cooler completely on 2 different sides. So the 2 fans are just gonna be flowing air through. And to illustrate how much of a better change this is, Gamers Nexus did a video with a 4090 sort of Titan special unreleased card that had this flow through design. I'll put the link to the video up here. Very impressive watch. They saw some incredible drops in temperatures just based off this design alone. So I think NVIDIA have definitely tweaked the engineering side of the cooler to the point where it's going to do an impressive job even on a 2-slot solution with such a big power draw. Though I think a lot of people are looking at this, me included, and going, hey, you can fit now a 5090 potentially in a mini ITX case like the Lee Dan collaboration H2O, which, little hint, is going to be actually my next mini ITX build here at Tech Yes City, which a lot of people commented in the previous mini ITX PC we did. They weren't impressed with the Antec mini ITX build that we recently did. Though there is just so much more to unpack here with not just the 5090, but also the 5080, 5070, 5070 Ti, and we're gonna do all that after today's video sponsor.
Do you need to get Windows 10 or Windows 11 activated and don't want to spend $200 or some other exorbitant price? Well, if so, today's video sponsor VIP SCD Keys has you covered. For as little as $15 using the coupon code BFTYC, you can get Windows 10 activated, and for a little bit more you can get Windows 11 activated too. Links in description below to find out more.
So a bit of a late sponsor spot there, but the RTX 5000 series, there is so much to talk about here. So let's go over now the 5080. And this is where I'm actually most curious about this card because it has, for instance, faster GDDR7 memory on board than actually all the other cards that are being released with the RTX 5000 series. Now also it's going to have some of the highest clock speeds too, and it retains a $1,000 price point. So a more modest price point than the 4080 when that was initially released, and also giving out sort of faster speeds on that bit bus and getting more out of those CUDA cores from the get-go, which makes it probably a card that's actually going to perform really well, even though it's looking like it's basically half of a 5090. But this one actually has a very important difference, one that I was personally looking at and getting excited about, and that is it's got not just dual encoders, it's got dual decoders, which is a big upgrade over the 4080, and also it's the same as the 5090. Now the 5090 does have 3 encoders and 2 decoders. So this is actually going to serve a big purpose, especially for people who want to host video rendering services and things like that. The decoding capabilities of a 5080 is actually going to be incredible, at least if it's got double the amount that the 4080 had, and it's also got a new generation of decoding and encoding too. Now in terms of the CUDA cores, they're on the Blackwell architecture. You can expect a performance increase there, and then you've also got new generation Tensor AI cores as well as ray tracing cores. So you're going to expect the capabilities of this card to perform actually quite a bit better than a 4080. So now we've talked about the 5090 and the 5080. Both these graphics cards will be launched at the end of this month on January 30. Now we're going to talk about the RTX 5070 and 5070 Ti. Now we'll start off with the 5070 because this one had a bold frame and a big claim that I was seeing. A lot of my friends were messaging me this one saying that a 5070 was going to give you more performance than a 4090. Now that is a huge claim to make, especially when we compare a 4090 having over 16,000 just previous generation CUDA cores versus a little over 6,000 on the 5070. If that's the case, you could expect the 5090 to perform, I don't know, in another dimension compared to the 4090. But this is where I'm going to sort of say that maybe this has got to do with a best case scenario in terms of putting on the multi-frame generation, which is DLSS 4, and then comparing that to DLSS 3 in particular titles with ray tracing on, knowing that the 5070 has better ray tracing processing capabilities than the 4090. In terms of just raw rasterization gaming, if you turn all this stuff off, I do believe the 5070 is going to be slower than a 4090. But here's where we go back to just wait for the benchmarks here, and we'll check out all these technologies on versus off and tell you guys what the real differences are going to be when it comes to raw gaming. But back to the 5070, and here we got the price tag going down $50 from $600 to now $550. And also we've still got the same 12 gigabytes of VRAM, though it's GDDR7 this time around. And it's also got the same 1x encoding and decoding solutions. And then stepping up to the 5070 Ti, this has actually got the improvements over the 4070 Ti when that was initially released, but very similar to the 4070 Ti Super, and it's going to carry 16 gigabytes of VRAM over a bigger bit bus, at least compared to the 4070 Ti. And here's where you've got the same 2x encoders and 1x decoder, even though it's on a newer generation. And I dare say if you are just a raw gamer looking for probably somewhat of the best value out of the new RTX 5000 series, this one on paper looks like it's going to be it, carrying a nice healthy boost there of near 9,000 CUDA cores, and not that far behind the RTX 5080, but also carrying 16 gigabytes of VRAM, even though it's clocked a little bit lower, but it's still going to be $250 cheaper, and it's going to be $200 more expensive than the 4070, sure, but I think it's going to carry an even bigger performance gap over the 5070 than the 4070 Ti did over the 4070. So this one is going to be, I think, for gamers, one of the best cards from NVIDIA with the RTX 5000 series launch. Now, in terms of the 5070 and the 5070 Ti on release dates, they are still to be confirmed, but it'll be sometime in February. Now looking at the final stack here and the breakdown of it, it looks like NVIDIA have planned this one out to be better value on the 5080, 5070 Ti and 5070 than their predecessor cards, as well as the 5090, then costing a bit more, but then having a whole lot more than the 4090. So this one is definitely looking like, dare I say, it's better value across the board. I know people are gonna say, Brian, look at the price go up on the 5090, but when you look at the specs, you are getting a huge bump in the VRAM, as well as the CUDA core count and that bit bus going to the 512 bit bus. But here's where it's time for me to talk about my thoughts and opinions now on the whole thing in relation to what I'm excited for with the RTX 5000 series and things that I'm not excited for. So first thing is the DisplayPort 2.1. That's coming across the board. You are going to just have the best experience on some of these newest and highest refresh rate monitors with that spec on board. Me personally, I like DisplayPort anyway over HDMI. I think the cables are just somewhat sturdier. I always have HDMI cables break here in the studio at a much higher frequency than DisplayPort cables. So it's good to see DisplayPort 2.1 there, knowing that it has not just the better cable standard, but also having a better transmissible data rate there for the cables at these high refresh rate monitors to get you the best picture, even though people say they can't tell at all. Then the next thing here is the smaller cooler size. As we hinted at earlier, mini ITX builders are going to like this generation, I think, especially with the 5090 coming in with what looks like a 2-slot cooler at 304 mil. This is going to fit in a lot of really small ITX cases, even some of those sub 10 liter cases, as opposed to the previous generation of 4000 series cards, especially at the high end. I could not find a smaller 4080 or 4090, and in the end I ended up finding a 4070 Ti that fit perfectly, and I was really happy with that. But I think mini ITX builders who want the absolute best are going to absolutely love the 5000 series. Then the next thing to talk about here is Reflex 2, which is actually a huge announcement that I have personally been looking into, and I won't be able to understand it until I actually get a hands-on with it and test it at 1000 FPS to see what's going on here, because they had two different examples being shown here, and that was with the finals, which I played it and I got bored of it pretty quickly and it didn't really apply to me that much. But then they got Valorant here, which is very competitive. It's a very competitive online shooter, and it's a very competitive online FPS game. And with Reflex 2, they're showing total, I do believe it's total input lag here of the whole system being at like 2 milliseconds, which is just incredible because me personally, the best I've seen out of the studio here when I've been doing testing is around like, I think 5 milliseconds was the best draw I've ever seen. So for them to say 2 milliseconds from mouse click to the final image coming up on your screen is extremely impressive. And I think gamers on all levels are going to benefit from this, whether you're playing a game that's not that optimized or whether you're playing a game like Valorant that's optimized for absolute pro mass money tournaments. I think anyone's going to benefit from Reflex too. So really looking forward to what they've done with this, where apparently from what I can gather so far is it's using predictive data sets from the initial pixel movements from the mouse to determine what the frame will actually be, and then sort of skipping the whole pipeline and pushing that frame out to the GPU in time for it to be out on your screen as a full picture. So for me personally, I think this is like the most interesting thing of the whole 5000 series announcement, but this will also apparently be available for all RTX users in due time. Then let's talk about DLSS 4 now. And here's where it's multi-frame generation, where I think Reflex 2 is definitely gonna have a big part in working with the multi-frame generation to reduce the input delay. And I noticed already with DLSS 3, they had Reflex working hand in hand to bring down the latency big time to make the frame generation not as noticeable in terms of input delay. And so I do believe Reflex 2 is going to work hand in hand to even work more on bringing down the perceived input latency to make the multi-frame generation of DLSS 4 more bearable and then ultimately give people a better experience. However, in some of these examples here, you're going to see massive performance increases in your games, especially if you're gaming at 4K 240 Hertz. Going from roughly, I think it was 60 FPS to then 240 FPS is just a huge increase. And so this is going to be a great experience for people who like to play single player, say RPGs, and they want to enjoy high frame rates. This is going to be obviously a really good thing there to get the most out of your gaming experience. But then of course for online competitive players, they're just going to turn this stuff off and it's not going to make a difference at all. And so if you're one of those people, you might want to wait for the benchmarks where you could say pick up a really good deal on the used market for an RTX 4000 series, and it's going to do pretty much the exact same job for the game you play, and you can save a lot of money in the process. So again, this is why we just wait for the benchmarks, we draw through all the hype. Though, now it's time to talk about, I guess, the last thing for me was the only negative, and I wouldn't even really call it a negative, and that was the silicon itself. It's, I think, using still the TSMC 4 nanometer. I think it's still the same silicon as they're using in the RTX 4000 series, I believe. I could be wrong here. However, it is refined and they have made some enhancements here. And so it does look like you'll get better silicon, but it's just not a huge gap as opposed to the RTX 3000 series going from that Samsung 8 nanometer to then the 4000 series where it went to that TSMC 4 or 5 nanometer, depending on how you look at it. But the silicon itself, this time around, is not essentially receiving a massive enhancement, but everything else architecturally is just seeing a huge increase, whether it's the GDDR7 to the clock speeds to all the technologies that are being introduced. Anyhow, guys, coming out of this whole announcement, I'm going to tell you guys the two cards that I'm looking forward to the most, and that is actually the 5070 Ti and the 5080. It's a weird one, I know, but I just think these two cards are actually, for me, from a price point value perspective, whether you want to do content creation with a 5080 or you want to game with the 5070 Ti, my predictions, they're going to be the two most impressive cards coming out of the 5000 series. Though also, I've got my DisplayPort 2.1 cable ready. This is actually not for this video. I've got to do some input latency testing before the RTX 5000 series releases because I want to test Battlemage and their claims with the input latency. Have they made improvements over the previous generation ARC? And the results are already looking pretty interesting so far. So I do look forward to giving you guys that video. However, in the meantime, do let us know in the comment section below what you think about the RTX 5000 series announcement here. Are you looking forward to it? If so, what card are you looking forward to? If you're not looking forward to it, do let us know what you're not looking forward to in the comments. Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.